So there is no better way to close out this event than with Commissioner Brendan Carr. Since joining the FCC, Commissioner Carr has led the critical effort to streamline federal infrastructure rules, and as he would say, make the U.S. regulatory landscape 5G ready. Thanks to his leadership, we will see more investment in more communities sooner. His job is not done, and he continues to work to eliminate impediments to innovation and new jobs. Let's give a big welcome and a big cheer for Commissioner Brendan Carr.
Well, thank you, Meredith, for that kind introduction, and thank you to CTIA for convening today's summit. I've been following online while I haven't been here, and at least up till now, you've had a really good lineup of speakers, so congratulations on that. I'm also aware that I'm the last thing between you and drinks, at least those of you that are here. I think the majority are already drinking, which is a good thing. This will go a lot better for them. So I'll just take about 30 minutes and we'll move right on. So as the title of this event makes clear, the race to 5G is on. Winning this race will mean more broadband for more Americans. It'll mean new opportunities for underserved communities, and it will mean unleashing the next wave of innovation and entrepreneurship in America. As a policymaker, I'm committed to seeing the U.S. win this race. Now, this crowd certainly doesn't need a primer on what 5G will mean, certainly not after the 4 hours of panels you've sat through. And you know the stats. Next generation of wireless, it'll be 100 times faster, 5 times more responsive than current technologies. But what I'm most excited about is what this transition could mean for families across the country. 5G is a platform that can support transformative applications. It's about autonomous cars, which could reduce the number of traffic deaths from the 40,000 per year we see right now to nearly 0. It's about the Internet of Things, smart city applications, which could bring tremendous efficiencies to businesses and neighborhoods alike. It's about delivering remote surgery and telehealth to communities that right now lack the healthcare options that they deserve. And it's about use cases we can't even envision today. But we're already seeing glimpses of what this connected future could mean for communities. Last week I visited Nevada, a town, Beatty, population 1,010. It's only about 120 miles from the Vegas Strip, but it is certainly a world away. Beatty has one medical clinic, and it's staffed by a nurse named Teresa. She says my blood pressure is excellent, so for those of you interested in my health, there's that update. But the clinic was going to shut down due to the economics of bringing in a doctor from a town 75 miles away to see patients. With a new high-speed broadband connection, however, the clinic can afford to stay open and allow patients to visit virtually with the physician. I tried it out, and Dr. Rainier told me over the video connection about a Beatty resident who turned out to have a potentially life-threatening blood infection that the doctor was able to diagnose in time to help save his life. And after Beatty, I drove about 30 miles down the road to Nevada's rural Amargosa Valley, to Ponderosa Dairies. Ponderosa houses about 15,000 cows, all tagged with RFID chips. Sarah, the manager there, jokes that they're connected cows. These chips collect information on the cow's health and feeding, and this data is then uploaded via high-speed wireless connection to a vet located in another state that can analyze it and recommend adjustments to feeding cycles. Now, of course, next-gen networks will enable even more innovations, yield even greater benefits. And that's why it's so important that we keep moving forward. As today's event makes clear, we're not alone in looking to win this race. Countries around the world are vying to be first. They want to see the capital necessary for 5G deployments invested in their parts of the world. They want consumers in their countries at the front of the line when it comes to realizing the benefits of 5G. And countries from Europe to Asia are already moving aggressively in this space. And at the FCC, we're committed to seeing the U.S. win this race. And we're executing on a plan that will enable us to do just that. We know the consequences of falling behind. We've seen it during earlier transitions in wireless technologies. Just this week, CTIA released an analysis showing the impact of wireless leadership on a country's jobs and economic growth. I've read it. It's a page-turner. But in case you have other plans for this weekend, here's the Cliff Notes version. Europe won the race to 2G, in large part because other parts of the world, including the US, failed to move quickly enough to modernize our regulatory frameworks. For example, the FCC required that carriers continue to support their analog 1G networks long after Europe dropped that requirement. By requiring carriers to maintain essentially two networks, our outdated regulations drained capital and resulted in less efficient use of spectrum. Japan won the race to 3G for similar reasons. In the 1990s, Europe tied spectrum bands to particular technologies, which delayed the repurposing of spectrum from 2G to 3G. Japan had no similar constraints, and the country launched 3 separate 3G networks by 2002. It took years for the US to come close to Japan's 3G deployment. But as we all now know, the US learned some lessons and bounced back. We won the race to 4G. The private sector did this by investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure. But in addition to the private sector's work, the US government took 2 important steps to help clear the way. First, we moved quickly to open up new spectrum bands, and second, we took tangible steps to facilitate the deployment of 4G infrastructure. The result? Today, over 99% of Americans have access to 4G LTE. Over 96% can choose from 3 or more facilities-based providers, and nearly 75% of all cellular connections in North America are LTE. That figure is only 42% in Western Europe. CTIA's new report also shows that our 4G leadership increased our country's GDP by $100 billion per year and cemented American preeminence in the tech sector more broadly. So as we turn to 5G, the stakes are high. Winning the race to 5G could mean 3 million new jobs, $500 billion added to the GDP, and $275 billion of private sector investment, all without a penny of new taxes. We want that. But our friends and competitors in Europe and Asia want that too. So what's our plan? After all, winning the race to 4G does not guarantee that we'll also win the race to 5G. Or to use a Super Bowl analogy, a two-peat is not easy. You can just ask Tom Brady. As a Redskins fan, I can make that joke. The good news is we don't need to invent a new strategy. We already know the winning playbook. As with 4G, we have to focus on 2 things, spectrum and infrastructure. And at the FCC, we're moving aggressively to execute on both fronts. On the spectrum side, there's no doubt that we're on the right track. In 2016, we became the first country in the world to allocate high-band spectrum for 5G, and we're now opening up even more 5G bands. On Tuesday, we voted to move forward with the auction of 24 and 28 gigahertz spectrum, which we expect will be prime candidates for 5G. Just yesterday, Chairman Pai announced that we'll vote next month on potentially opening up spectrum in the 2.5 gigahertz band for greater and more efficient use, including for 5G applications. At the FCC, we've already assigned more high-band spectrum for 5G than any country in the world. In fact, we're more than 4 gigahertz ahead of second place China. And we won't stop there. We're looking to free up more low, mid, and high-band spectrum. But our aggressive push to free up spectrum is not going to be enough on its own. The second part of the equation is to move just as aggressively to modernize and update our infrastructure deployment rules to ensure they're what I call 5G ready. So to that end, I appreciate that Chairman Pai asked me to lead the FCC's efforts in our wireless infrastructure proceeding. Just last month, I'm pleased to report the FCC took a major step forward in this effort. As you know, 5G networks will look very different from today's 4G deployments. 5G will involve the addition of hundreds of thousands of new small-scale facilities with antennas no larger than a backpack. Upwards of 80% of all new deployments will be these types of small cells. They can go on the sides of buildings, light poles, and blend in with surrounding environments. These deployments will look nothing like those 100-foot towers that many people associate with prior generations of wireless service. The problem is that many of our country's infrastructure deployment rules at the federal level, at the state level, they've not been updated. They still assume that every new deployment is a tall 100-foot tower. The result? The deployment costs are too high and the regulatory approval process takes too long. 30% of the total cost of deploying a small cell has been going to federal reviews designed for those larger towers. Left unchecked, this outdated approach would have threatened our leadership in wireless. So our message was clear. For next-gen networks, we need next-gen regulation. Here's what we did. Our March order exempts small cells from certain federal historic and environmental review procedures, and it streamlined reviews for those deployments of those larger towers. It was heartening to see the broad base of support that spoke out in favor of this important decision. This one step is expected to save nearly $1.6 billion, create 17,000 jobs, and lead to the deployment of 57,000 new small cells. Those are big numbers. But the big deal to me is this: cutting regulatory red tape can flip the business case for thousands of communities. Communities that might have been uneconomical for the private sector to deploy 5G will now get their shot at next-gen networks. Winning the race to 5G is not about getting next-gen networks deployed in New York and San Francisco. Those places will get 5G regardless. Success is ensuring that all communities benefit from 5G. Communities like Woodstock, Virginia, which is in the Shenandoah Valley. I went there and saw a new small cell that's bringing greater educational opportunities to the local high school. Communities like Carr in East Baltimore. It's a relatively rundown neighborhood. Not too long ago, there's still some row houses that are empty. But if you look around, you can see new development on the rise. And if you look closely enough, you can see some of it in the new small cells that are going up, many of which are providing the only high-speed connection to that neighborhood. These and other opportunities are ones we want to build on and replicate across the country. Regulatory reform can help make that happen. So our work is not over. Winning the race to 5G will require more than just streamlining our approach to the federal regulatory review process. That's why the FCC has been looking at the important role that state and local review plays in facilitating the deployment of next-gen infrastructure. My staff and I are still working through these issues, but I can share a few ideas that we've been discussing. First, there's no question that states and localities expect and deserve to be compensated for the reasonable costs they incur in managing rights-of-ways and access to public infrastructure. But that doesn't mean we should view each deployment as a revenue-generating opportunity. The economic benefits for communities arise once we get our neighborhoods connected to next-gen networks. Our policy should be aimed at promoting those types of deployments. Second, we should ensure that our shot clocks on local reviews continue to serve their intended purposes. If you remember, we adopted the existing timeframes before the spike in smaller scale facilities we're seeing today. So we need to make sure we have the right review periods in place. Obtaining timely decisions is key to the timely deployment of new networks. Third, the FCC should provide even more certainty about access to rights-of-way and our views on state and local moratoria. As we do so, we should promote greater parity between the treatment of wireless infrastructure and other uses of rights-of-way. There are other important and common sense guideposts that merit consideration when we discuss state and local review, and I look forward to sharing more specific thoughts in the coming weeks. There are many important stakeholders out there, and I welcome the chance to continue to benefit from a range of perspectives. In the meantime, it's safe to say we are all committed to seeing the U.S. win the race to 5G. We know the challenge, we know the opportunity, and we have a plan that will help extend the United States leadership as next-gen networks come online. So thank you again for letting me offer a couple of words. Appreciate it. Thank you.